Today I'll be making one of my favorite wild teas, made from white cedar leaves. This episode is a segment taken from my survival hiking series. If you'd like to see the full series, there's a link in the description below. The species of white cedar tree that I'm talking about is also more accurately known as the Eastern White Cedar. Eastern white cedar trees grow mainly in eastern Canada, from Manitoba all the way through Ontario, Quebec, and into the Maritime provinces. White cedar is also native to the northeastern United States, particularly around the Great Lakes region. These cedar trees like to grow in wet forests or on rocky slopes, where competition from other tree species is reduced. White cedars are quite resilient, which is why they are more than capable of thriving in wet or rocky environments when other trees cannot. But there is also a cost to living in difficult soil conditions. As a result, white cedars have a slow growth rate. They are slender trees and they typically max out at a height of between 33 to 66 feet tall. In my area, most mature cedars are between 30 to 40 feet tall. White cedars are of the coniferous variety. Although most evergreens have needles, cedars have something that is sort of a hybrid between a needle and a leaf. Being a conifer, a white cedar's leaves remain green, but they're much softer to the touch than a needle, and when turned sideways, the cedar leaf is flat, much like a deciduous leaf is. Cedar leaves are certainly strange, but it's their unique design and texture that makes them easy to identify. With my birch bark in one hand and a handful of cedar in the other, I headed off to build a fire. Since the ground was wet, I laid down some kindling as a base. This will protect the fire from pulling moisture from the ground and being snuffed out. With the fire stabilized, I poured some water into a pot and added my handful of cedar leaves. Once the pot had come to a boil, I removed it from the fire and allowed it to steep for a few minutes. Continuing to boil the cedar would have destroyed a lot of the vitamin C that it contained, which is why I removed it as soon as it got to that point. After I had poured the tea into my mug, I did my best to skim the liquid off the top. Cedar contains a small amount of tannins, which will rise to the surface of the tea. Sometimes it can be seen as a very thin, floating film, which can easily be skimmed or poured off. Tannins taste bitter and can make some people's stomachs feel upset. However, I don't usually bother to remove the tannins because they don't bother me. But I do admit that my tea probably tastes better without it. If you have not tried white cedar tea before, I highly recommend it. It has a slight sweetness to it, and it tastes very similar to the way it smells.